The Anatomist's Wife by Charlotte Wightwick. Part 1. Caroline. Chapter 1. Hunterian Museum, Royal College of Surgeons, Lincoln's Inn Fields, London, December the 30th, 1853. When Caroline Owen opened the door to her husband's office, she found herself staring at a human spine. Not all of it, just the lower part, a fresh specimen suspended by linen threads in a jar of clear preserving fluid. She grimaced. It would have been painful, that back, when its owner was alive. "Look, Carrie, a pronounced lateral curvature, significant thickening and distortion of the bone." She imagined her father's voice, high and wheezy with excitement as it would have been had he been here to see it. He had always been keen to share his knowledge with her, even in its more macabre forms. She shook her head to dispel the image. It did no good to dwell in the past. Instead, she focused on the man sitting at the impeccably tidy desk in front of her, his fingertips pressed together in an exact triangle as he studied the bones with a hard, intense gaze. "Richard?" she said. He didn't answer. "That looks like an interesting case," she tried again. When he still failed to acknowledge her presence, Caroline stepped closer, her full skirts brushing against his desk in the tiny, airless space. She held her breath against the slight scent of decay and preserving alcohol which always lingered here, no matter how often she sent the maids to polish the wooden surfaces. "Caroline," he croaked, finally looking up at her. "I didn't know you were in town today." Irritation and concern vied equally in her mind. He had known she would be here. They had a dinner engagement that evening, and she had agreed to come up to town early so that they could have lunch with their son Will before he went back to school. A lunch that Richard was now late for. But there was definitely something wrong. "Your voice is awful," she said. "You can't make a speech like that. Shall I have Susanna make you some lemon and honey?" Richard shook his head, his eyes straying back to the jar in front of him. "I'm fine," he said, sounding more normal now. Caroline frowned and realized what it was that was bothering her about the room. Except for the specimen jar, the desk was empty. He was always tidy, but Richard was supposed to be writing his speech for the next evening. He was attending the dinner in the Iguanodon to mark the opening of the dinosaur court at the Crystal Palace. But there was no paper, no neatly made notes, and no reference books. Caroline knew he'd been worrying all through Christmas about what to say and how to deal with the issue of his disagreements with Dr. Mantell, though he hadn't confided in her. "What have you got there?" she asked again, reverting to what was in front of her. If she pressed him about the speech, he would only refuse to answer. "It would have been awful for the individual, of course. Even I can see that," she said. Richard stood, a quick movement, so that he loomed over his wife. She tilted her head back, trying to see his expression, but he was too tall for her to make it out clearly. Yes, it was. Dreadful. "You knew the patient?" Caroline was surprised. As Professor of Comparative Anatomy at the Royal College of Surgeons, Richard did not often attend to medical cases himself, receiving what was interesting or notable only post-mortem for future study. "You could say that. It doesn't matter," he muttered. Caroline craned her head to look at her husband more closely. He really did not look well. Always pale, his complexion currently resembled one of the pallid, dead creatures which surrounded them on the shelves above his desk. His voice had become unsteady again, and his hands were trembling. Richard was not a squeamish man. Death, precisely anatomized, ordered, and labelled, was his daily business. It did not usually affect him like this. She reached out to touch his arm. "It clearly does matter," she said. Richard moved, and her hand brushed only air. "You're upset." "I'm fine," he contradicted her. She paused, thinking. "Who was he, Richard?" she asked at last.